Okay, welcome everybody. This talk will be about shitty CSS. I entitled it CSS Abuse because some of it is pretty malicious. Some people told me they had trouble pronouncing the subtitle of it. It's Cataclysmically Sinister Stylesheets. I know it's a bit of a tongue twister, but if you try, I'm sure you can make it. I'll be making your ritualistic offerings for today. Who am I? My name is Steve de Jonghe. You can find me arguing with strangers on the internet as Searcher. I have about 15 years experience of making text bold, which is pretty much literally half my life since my 30th birthday is next month. My official title is lead front-end developer at Wondercrowd Belgium. I work in the Antwerp office. I'm not a woman, I apologize. Some people think I'm a woman because of the picture, but I'm sorry, I'm not. Now, a brief history of making bold text. So, back in the day, we would just use a B tag and call it a day. It's bold, right? Does the trick. So then we moved on to using a font tag for no real reason and then slapping a style attribute on it and then making it bold that way. But then we thought maybe we want to split these things and not have them together all the time. Then we moved on to having an actual paragraph which has meaning, gives meaning to the text, and then just add a class on it that'll make it bold. It's still somewhat problematic because you end up with a ton of classes, and if you don't want to make it bold anymore, but then it just doesn't mean anything anymore. So then we moved on to just using random elements, whatever they have to be, or don't have to be, and then adding a class on it with like a modifier on it. And the modifier actually tells you what it means and not what it does. The implication of what it does doesn't matter at this point. I think you're all familiar with these concepts. They're not that new. Now, what's the motivation for this talk? Because who wants to learn about shitty CSS, right? Well, the thing is, some of it's just for giggles. Some of them have security implications, meaning that it's important when people can inject CSS. It's not harmless. And it can do more than just make things look bad. But one of the biggest reasons is that your code will come to haunt you, and this sort of works both ways. As somebody with 15 years of experience, I know the old tricks, and I recognize them when I see them. They don't look strange to me. I've been through IE6. When a property starts with an underscore, I know what the intention was. But there's a lot of people coming into the industry fresh and new, and they only know the good techniques. So when they see the bad techniques, they might just freak out and have no idea what they're even trying to do. So, some full disclosure, pretty much 50% of this talk is ripped straight from Matthias Bannen's talks. The one I linked at the bottom is a really good one from CSSConf Asia, I think. I recommend you watch it. If you just Google that, you'll find it. So what will we be talking about today? Which kinds of shitty CSS? So first off, some sneaky tricks to piss off support engineers, and which includes future you. Some Gordian knot level selectors that are just nearly impossible to comprehend by just looking at them. A ton of pseudo elements. I love pseudo elements. My coworkers will tell you that I abuse these to no end. And then some default implied or canceling properties, just like a list of code that essentially does nothing. Then we go on to the downright malicious practices, which also include faking properties. So if you're not linting in your editor, you won't necessarily see that there's a spelling error. So you might think the rule applies, but it doesn't. We're going to hide and replace some content. This is always fun because it's really annoying to debug. And then we're going to finish off with brute forcing some sensitive data. So what will we be using? Most of the examples are like process CSS or like a CSS or less, but some of the features that are used will be native soon, so it still sort of applies. These include nesting, ampersands, more ampersands, and really a lot of ampersands. So let's get to it. Pissing off posterity for beginners. So why would we write a simple selector like above when we can make this infinitely more complex and just use the following sibling selector and just endlessly chain on that until we get to the 10th element, the one we want, and then we clear that. And you can see it compiles to that, which actually works in IE8, and this is why you might find this in the wild because somebody wanted to clear the 10th item on IE8. We can do worse, though. If you want to clear every, like if you want stuff in 2 columns, so you flow them left, and then you clear every, like, 2n plus 1, right? But that's way too easy. I mean, if you read that, you can instantly see what it means. So I'm sure we can make that more complex. And I'm not saying you should put these comments there. That just makes it easy for the person reading it. If you leave them out, it's like, and you scramble it a bit, just fuck up the intonation a bit, then it's nearly impossible to read. And we're already getting into some ampersand happiness here. So first off, we take the first child, then we take the second 2, which is the third, then we use an ampersand comma, which pretty much takes the selector up to that point, stores it, and then we use ampersand plus 2 more, which is the 5th, and then we just repeat that process. So it stores up the selector for the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th, the 9th element, and then we use it to clear it. So this will effectively put stuff in 2 columns in the most complicated way you can do it. But how far can we go with ampersands? Can anybody glance at this and know what it will compile to? I'll give you like 2 seconds. This is what it compiles to. So the 1 ends up smack in the middle. The 2 will be before the 1. Then 3 and 4 will be after that. And then 5 and 6 are just around that. So it's like nearly impossible to know beforehand what'll come out of the box. For like uninitiated members, this might seem a bit complicated. You can use this with BEM and SMACs, and Harry went over this morning. You can use the ampersand and just add a string. You don't need to add a class to it or something. Now you get bonus points for this because you need like a recent version of Sass or less. This doesn't work in any old versions. It'll just give you a compile error. Now, the ampersand thing can go really deep. You can actually use it on the knot and inside of the knot at the same time. Now, take note of the what and the lol. And like wonder which one will end up within the knot and which won't. Well, here's what it compiles to. So yeah, it's pretty hard to comprehend it without actually looking at the compiled code and going, okay, I kind of expected that. So moving on, what can we do with pseudos to induce some psychosis in our coworkers? What is a pseudo anyway? Well, there's pseudo classes which influence the state of an element, but there's also pseudo elements, which are selectors that pretty much define a part of the element or create a new element within the element. Now, my favorite ones are before and after. You can use these in various creative ways. But they're basically, the before gets inserted as the first child of the element, and the after gets inserted as the last child of the element. One thing to note is that elements that cannot have a child cannot have a before and after pseudo, because there's no place to insert the child. Now, as frontenders, you probably know that you have the last say on matters, so you win. If there's an argument, you will win anyway, because you decide the content. So if somebody puts something in a div and you're like, I'm not too happy with that, I'm going to put a poop there. Yeah, I like poop. So in this case, we're just reducing the font size of the element to 0 so the text disappears. And then we're putting a pseudo in there, resetting the font size, and adding content. By default, pseudos are inline, so we don't even need to do anything. But can we do worse than that and make it actually more complicated? Well, we can actually use 2 pseudos and overlap one over the other. And we can craft it in such a way so that the after is written first in the code, so somebody might assume that it comes above, that it comes like below the other one, and before comes on top, but it won't. In the end, this will just show, yeah, really, in light golden rod yellow. And yes, that's an actual color. You also get bonus points here for using obscure units like inches. Who even uses inches in the world, right? And using inches, using units on 0 values for like no reason whatsoever. Oh, sorry. Now, I use pseudos a lot to put icons around links, for instance. Like if you need an icon before a link and after a link, but you have no idea how big the link is, you can use these to slap them around it. But I like to just flip them around and put the before at the end and the after in the beginning, so it just fucks with people a bit. Whilst we're on the subject of poop, you probably know you can use these as classes, right? And IDs. That's also a real color, by the way. It resembles poop. Now, you can't really push this too far, though. It doesn't work as an element. I think we need this in the spec, right? I need an element, poop. By the way, khaki does not resemble poop at all. It's a really light color. Speaking of things we need in the spec, it doesn't look like we're going to be getting the nested pseudos we were promised at one point, which I'm really sad about, because this would allow you to make an empty page and put like an infinite amount of crap in there, just by using CSS. Now, there's more things that we don't have in the spec. Remember important? Well, it doesn't really matter what you put there for certain versions of IE. So you might come across these things and be like, what? That doesn't even do anything. But it used to. In IE, this would be red. There's also a little trick you can use by just repeating the same class over and over, and it gets more and more specific. Now, some browsers, well, some used to and some still do allow you to override an ID by using 256 classes in a row, or override a class with using 250, or override, yeah, that's wrong. It should say override a class with 256 elements. So you can like step up one by using 256. I haven't tried if you can use like 256 times 256 elements to override an ID. You might. Now, a little intermezzo. Consider for a second how much you can actually do with very little on a page, but just using pseudos on elements that are implied. Some people have actually used this to build entire games with like barely any elements. Let's see if it loads. Yay. So the JavaScript part is just comments, right? CSS is quite a lot, but the elements is like, that's not even that much, right? And if it would actually load, it's a game where you shoot birds, and there's a timer, and it counts how many birds you shoot, and when the timer's over, it overlaps the screen with game over. It doesn't look like it's loading, though. Anyway, let's try another one. I think this is the racing game? Yeah. Let me refresh. So you have to like cross over this thing, and then it starts moving, and then you have to follow this. And as soon as you touch the edge, it'll freak out and tell you you lose. But if you look at the thing, it's actually not that many elements. There's like not that much going on here. There's some text here, but that's pretty much it. Like, not that much going on. And people can make entire games out of this. Why are we using JavaScript? Some people even made an entire font. You've probably seen people make logos out of it. I tried to make one before the slide, but there wasn't enough time. But like, this is really minimal. I would have expected this to be way worse. This is actually somewhat decent. This probably shouldn't be in this talk. So, moving on. I love pulling the old switcheroo on people, so they assume something's going to happen, but it completely doesn't. So, just like pretend you know what you're doing and just repeat default properties with their default values. It's like nothing happens, but it looks like I'm doing a lot, right? And again, bonus points for using inches on a 0 value that is the default. Now, you've probably seen this before. Like people nest selectors, and they have some properties at the top, and then at the bottom, below the nesting, there's the same property again with a different value. So it's like somebody edited it and it just added stuff, I guess. That's how CSS works, right? Now, this is a really tricky one. So at the top, I define a color, but then I define a background color and pretty much make the text clip through the background color, so you get the text in the background color instead of the real color. But I've chosen two colors that are really similar, so it's really hard to tell. It's not actually that color. I love it. By the way, as a side note, I love it when designers do that in a Photoshop file. They will put text, put a text color on it, and then put a color overlay on the layer and make it really close. All right, moving on. This effectively does nothing. So I set a margin left of 100%, but then I expand, because then it collapses, right, to the left, and it's like pretty much no width. But then I expanded to the right by using a negative margin, and then translated back into the screen. So effectively, we're back at the point we started. Speaking of which, we gotta go full circle on this, right? Or like 4 full circles. By the way, I did not know turn was a valid unit. Also, bonus points for using negative values for no reason. Now, on to the unadulterated evil. What could you do if all you could inject was CSS? Well, back in the day, it was ridiculous. You could do anything, literally anything. You could run any JavaScript, go fetch any data. Hell, in some browsers, you could even access the registry. It's pretty hard to pull off nowadays, though. Like, you have to put it in an iframe, force IE into quirks mode, and like all sorts of weird stuff. So you're probably not going to be able to be all that successful with this, except with like, yeah, really old browsers. But what can we still do? One caveat, though, size shouldn't be a constraint because this is going to give it pretty ridiculous, pretty big. Sorry, pretty quick. So, you know the attribute selector, right? You can choose like if the attribute starts with. So, if a username is pre-filled in a field, it's on the value attribute. So what can we do with that? Well, we can set a background to something that requests the same letter, so we can log it somewhere with their IP or whatever, and then we can sort of brute force their entire username, if you will. This is going to be like several megabytes, but we can probably daisy chain them together with imports, right? Now, some of you are probably familiar with this. This is a file you can inject into somebody's default styles. It used to be a lot easier. Nowadays, for Chrome, you have to write an extension and stuff, but it's still pretty easy to pull off. So when somebody doesn't lock their computer, you can simply install this as their default styles and enable a couple of them. And like you can flip these all websites upside down, but this is pretty obvious, right? They're gonna catch on pretty quick. If you do a more subtle version of this, it'll take a lot longer before they actually notice, and they might have seen 1 or 2 eye doctors in between. This is one of my favorite. It spins it really, really slowly. So it's like, you notice something is wrong, but what's going on? I like this one. It just reverses images, just flips them upside down. In most cases, it'll be pretty obvious, but in some cases, you get this notion of like, there's something wrong with this perspective, but I can't really put my finger on it. I put one in there that makes all the text in your console really blurry, so it's really hard to read all the text in your console, but only in the console. And I think that's about it. Yeah, that's all. Please clap.